It was a Tuesday night, the kind of night that usually felt slower, easier. But for Maya Lopez, nothing about her life felt easy anymore. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror of her tiny apartment in New Jersey, pulling her dark hair into a neat bun, covering the shadows under her eyes with a thin layer of makeup. Her uniform smelled faintly of bleach and coffee, no matter how many times she washed it. Maya was 27, and she carried herself with the quiet weight of someone much older. By day, she rushed her younger brother Mateo to doctor's appointments and picked up his insulin from the pharmacy. By night, she slipped into the black and white uniform of a waitress at the Gilded Sparrow, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The pay was decent only if the tips were generous, and lately, even that wasn't enough to cover the medical bills piling up on her kitchen table. She had once dreamed of sculpting marble, of seeing her art displayed in galleries, of creating something that could outlast her. 3 years ago, she was a promising art student. Then Mateo's diagnosis changed everything. Insurance only covered part of his treatment, and Maya couldn't watch her brother suffer. So she traded clay and chisels for trays and menus. That night, as she crossed the bridge into the city, the lights of Manhattan glittered against the dark sky like another world. A world she could serve, but never belong to. She reminded herself to smile, to keep her voice steady, to be invisible yet flawless. That was the rule of working at the Sparrow. When she arrived, the staff was buzzing. A late reservation had come in for the best table in the house. The maitre d' pulled her aside, lowering his voice with urgency. "Maya, table 7 is yours tonight. Don't ask questions, just be perfect. This guest is very, very important." Maya's stomach tightened. Important usually meant wealthy, powerful, and impossible to please. She nodded anyway. That was the job. She carried menus through the candlelit dining room, weaving past tables where polished silverware sparkled and glasses of vintage wine caught the glow of chandeliers. And then she saw them, 2 men settling into the velvet booth at table 7. One of them was loud, animated, the type who made sure the whole room noticed him. But it was the other man who made her pause for a heartbeat. He was older, silent, with a presence so heavy it seemed to quiet the air around him. He looked at her in a way no one had in a long time, direct, searching, as though he was studying her instead of the menu. Maya steadied her breath and forced a smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." She didn't know it yet, but this table, this night, was about to change her life forever. The first man did most of the talking. He had silver hair slicked back and a watch that glinted with every flick of his wrist. His voice carried across the room as he bragged about a recent deal, dropping names of senators and executives like trophies. Maya had seen men like him before, the kind who treated the waitstaff as invisible, who snapped fingers at bartenders and waved hands at busboys as if they were nothing more than props in the theatre of his ego. But the older man, the quiet one, was different. He didn't speak much, but every time Maya approached the table, she could feel his eyes on her. Not in the way that made her skin crawl, but in a way that felt unsettling, like he was peeling back the layers she used to hide the exhaustion in her eyes. When she poured his glass of water, his voice broke the air for the first time. It was low, gravelly, but clear. "Thank you, Maya." 2 words. Simple. Yet no one had spoken her name with that kind of deliberate weight in a long time. She nearly forgot to answer before whispering, "You're welcome." The meal went on. She carried plates heavy with seared scallops, truffle risotto, and the kind of desserts that cost more than her electricity bill. Her feet ached, but her smile never slipped. That was the mask she wore every night. Then, just as she handed them the dessert menu, the older man lifted his eyes and asked her something no one expected. He nodded toward the carved wooden post at the corner of the booth. "That detail there, it's new, isn't it?" Maya froze for a second. The truth was, that piece had been broken weeks earlier by a careless guest. The restaurant owner got a repair estimate that was outrageous, so Maya had taken the splintered wood home herself. In the quiet hours after her shifts, she glued, sanded, and carved it back into place with the last of her old tools. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She didn't think anyone had noticed. "Yes, sir," she said carefully. "The old one was damaged. I fixed it." The older man's gaze lingered for a moment. Then he said, almost like a statement rather than a compliment, "It's better now, cleaner, more confident." Or, before Maya could reply, the louder man waved his hand impatiently. "Skip dessert, just bring the check." She nodded, heart pounding. It was such a small exchange, a passing comment. But for the first time in years, someone had recognized her hands not as those of a waitress, but as those of an artist. As she walked back to the register, she didn't know that the bill she was about to deliver would hold more than numbers. It would carry the weight of a decision, one that would shake her entire world. The check came to just over $4,000, the kind of number Maya couldn't even wrap her head around anymore. It was more than 3 months of her rent, more than the pile of medical bills stacked in neat but terrifying order on her kitchen counter. She walked back to the booth with the leather folder in her hands, careful to keep her face neutral. The silver-haired man barely looked up as he signed, still bragging loudly on his phone. The older man, quiet, steady, took his time, his pen moving slowly across the receipt. He glanced up at her one last time. "It was an excellent meal, Maya." And then they stood, sliding out of the booth, their presence leaving the room as heavy as it had entered. In seconds, the dining room was buzzing again, her co-workers whispering as though a storm had just passed. Her heart raced as she approached the table. Everyone was watching. It was the unspoken rule of restaurants like this. When a billionaire dined, the tip became legend. People whispered about tips big enough to cover car payments, even mortgages. Tonight, everyone expected fireworks. Maya let her hand hover over the folder, steadying her breath before picking it up. For a moment, it felt strangely light. She opened it slowly, as if the weight of her future was hidden inside. Her eyes fell on the receipt. The total amount was neatly signed, and on the line for the tip, in clear handwriting, it read $1. Tucked inside was a crisp, single $1 bill, so new it looked like it had just left the mint. In the US, leaving $1 on a bill that size wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was deliberate. A message, an insult sharp as glass. As the room seemed to tilt, a hot wave crawled up Maya's neck. $1, not zero, not overlooked, one intentional dollar. Whispers rippled across the staff. Her co-worker Ben leaned over, trying to peek. "So, did he buy you a condo?" His grin vanished when he caught sight of the bill. "No way, $1, that's brutal." Maya's hands trembled as she slipped the bill into her apron. She forced her smile back in place, but inside, her chest burned. It wasn't about the money. A big tip wouldn't have erased her brother's medical debt, wouldn't have saved her from rent notices. But a single dollar, handed down from a man who could buy and sell entire city blocks, felt like an insult carved into her very skin. Still, something in her refused to crumble. She thought of her father, who used to tell her, "They can take your money, Maya, they can take your time, but never let them take your grace." The dollar sat heavy in her pocket. A cheap reminder, maybe. Or maybe a challenge. That night, long after the last table had been cleared and the chairs were stacked, Maya walked home with the $1 bill still tucked in her apron pocket. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It was too deliberate, too sharp a wound to just crumple up and forget. On the subway ride back to New Jersey, the bill pressed against her side like a stone. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Why $1? Why not nothing? Why take the time to write it down? She tried to focus on the rhythm of the train, the swaying bodies packed into the car, the ads peeling at the corners above the windows. But her thoughts always came back to that single dollar, as if it carried a meaning she hadn't uncovered yet. When she stepped off the train and climbed the cracked stairs out of the station, the cold night air hit her face. On the corner near the bus stop, an old man was huddled against the wall, wrapped in a thin coat that barely covered his knees. His hands shook as he cupped them together, trying to keep warm. Maya hesitated. She was exhausted, her shoes biting into her heels, her whole body aching from the shift. But she felt that dollar in her pocket, stiff and unforgiving. She walked into the 24-hour deli by the corner and bought the cheapest hot coffee they had. She placed the steaming cup in the old man's hands. "Here," she said softly. The man looked up, his eyes clouded with age and surprise. He whispered, "God bless you, miss." For the first time all night, Maya felt her chest loosen. That single dollar, meant to belittle her, had been turned into something else, something kind, something human. She didn't know if the man in the grey suit had meant to test her, insult her, or simply remind her of the gulf between his world and hers. But she knew this much: he wouldn't define her. Back in her apartment, she sat at the small kitchen table covered in bills. Matteo was asleep in the next room, his breathing steady, the machines beside his bed humming softly. Maya unfolded the receipt, the one with the cruel number written in sharp pen strokes. Her hand hovered for a moment, then she picked up a pen. She began to write. She didn't write with anger or bitterness, she wrote with clarity. She wanted him to know that the dollar hadn't broken her, that she'd used it to warm a stranger on a cold night. That dignity couldn't be measured in bills or coins. Her words spilled out, steady and sure, filling the empty space at the bottom of the receipt. It wasn't a complaint, it wasn't begging, it was simply her truth. When she set the pen down, she looked at what she had written and felt a strange peace. She had taken the insult and reshaped it into something else, just as she had once reshaped broken wood into something whole again. The next morning she would decide what to do with this note. But for now, she sat in the quiet of her apartment, her brother safe in the next room, and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The $1 bill stayed in her pocket all night, folded so many times it felt like a splinter pressing into her palm. Every time she reached for her pen or her notepad, she felt it. Every laugh from a table nearby, every clink of a wine glass, only sharpened the weight of that insult. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sore feet. Her co-workers watched her carefully, some with pity, some with anger. A few even whispered that she should have marched back and thrown the bill at his face. Maya knew that wasn't her way, but she also knew she couldn't just let it sit in her pocket like some bitter little secret. As she walked home, the city lights glowing against the wet pavement, she turned the bill over in her fingers. It wasn't just money, it was a message, and messages could be answered. The next morning, she tucked the dollar into a plain envelope. She slid in a note, her handwriting steady even though her chest was tight. "You left this behind, I believe it belongs to you." No accusations, no anger, just a mirror held up to the man who thought so little of her. When she showed the envelope to Ben before mailing it, he almost dropped his coffee. "You're really sending it back?" She nodded. "I don't need his dollar, I need him to know I saw what he did." Ben shook his head, half smiling in disbelief. "Girl, you're either the bravest person I know or the craziest. Maybe both." For the first time since that night, Maya felt a little lighter. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't the girl who had to swallow every insult and smile. She was choosing her response, on her own terms. And somewhere deep down she wondered, would he even notice? Or would a single returned dollar, wrapped in silence, echo louder than any words she could say? Days slipped by, each one blurring into the next. Maya worked double shifts, kept track of Matteo's medication schedule, and tried to ignore the constant ringing of her phone from bill collectors. Every time an unfamiliar number appeared, her stomach clenched. She half expected it to be some lawyer's office, accusing her of crossing a line, demanding she explain why she had mailed that note. But the days stayed silent. No calls, no letters, no sign that the envelope had ever landed anywhere but a trash bin in some corporate mailroom. By the second week, Maya convinced herself it had been foolish. A small, romantic act of defiance that meant nothing to a man like him. She had done her part, she told herself. She had written her truth. Maybe that was all it was ever meant to be. Still, at night, when the apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of Matteo's medical equipment, she found herself replaying the words she'd written, wondering if, somewhere high above the city, he had read them. Then, one grey Friday afternoon, an envelope appeared in her mailbox. It was heavier than the usual junk mail, sealed in thick cream-coloured paper with no return address. Her name was written across the front in sharp, elegant script, Maya Lopez. Her breath caught. She carried it inside as if it were fragile glass. At the kitchen table, her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a single card, the paper stiff and expensive, the kind she had only ever seen in galleries when invitations to art shows were pinned to boards. The message was brief. Maya Lopez, you are invited to a private meeting regarding a matter of personal significance. The meeting will be held this coming Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the offices of Reed & Associates, Park Avenue, Suite 5500. Transportation will be provided. Please be ready at 1:15. Sincerely, Evelyn Reed. Maya stared at the words until they blurred. Evelyn Reed. She had never heard the name before, but something about the way it was written made her skin prickle. Formal, cold, powerful. Her first thought was fear. What if this was trouble? What if the man in the grey suit had taken her note as an insult, and now she was being summoned to answer for it? A billionaire didn't need reasons to crush someone like her. She folded the letter and pressed it against her chest, heart racing. She thought about ignoring it, pretending it had never arrived, but deep down she knew she couldn't. This wasn't junk mail. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had read her words. And now, for reasons she couldn't begin to understand, they wanted to see her. As she sat in the quiet of her kitchen, Matteo's voice called from the other room, asking if she had seen his glucose monitor. She answered him, her voice steady, even as her mind swirled with questions. Tuesday was only 4 days away. And whatever waited for her on Park Avenue, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. Maya didn't expect to ever see him again. She had dropped the envelope in the mailbox and told herself that was the end of it. But a week later, she found herself lingering across the street from a glass tower downtown, the kind of place where men like him lived their lives above the clouds. She told herself she wasn't stalking him, she only wanted to make sure the letter actually reached him, that it hadn't been lost or tossed aside by some assistant. She still had no idea why it mattered so much, but something inside her needed to know. From where she stood, she could see the building's lobby glowing with morning light. Suits rushed in and out, polished shoes clicking against marble. And then she saw him, the older man from that night, the quiet one, the one who had told her the meal was excellent. He was standing near the revolving door, waiting for a car. Her heart hammered. She had no plan, no words prepared. She just started moving, one step and then another, until she was crossing the street. Inside the lobby, the noise seemed to fade. The smell of cologne, leather briefcases, polished stone, it all pressed in on her. And then his eyes found hers. He blinked in surprise, recognition flickering. Maya, isn't it? His voice was calm, the same tone he'd used at the restaurant, as if they were picking up a conversation left unfinished. She nodded, clutching her bag like a lifeline. I just wanted to make sure you got something, the envelope. For the first time his expression shifted, a shadow crossing his features. He looked at her more carefully now, as though she wasn't just a passing face in a dining room. I did, he said slowly, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Maya's throat went dry. She had imagined him laughing it off, tossing the bill in the trash. She hadn't imagined this, a man who looked unsettled, almost guilty. Before she could answer, a black car pulled up outside. A driver stepped out, opening the door. The man gave her one last look, something unreadable in his eyes. We'll talk again, he said, almost like a promise. And then he was gone, swallowed up by tinted glass and traffic. Maya stood frozen in the lobby, the marble floor cool beneath her shoes, her chest heavy with a mix of fear and hope. She had returned $1, but now it felt like she had set something much larger in motion. 2 days later, Maya came home to find an envelope tucked under her apartment door. The paper was heavier than usual, the kind used for things that mattered. Inside was a note written on company letterhead, with her name carefully printed at the top. I'd like to speak with you, tomorrow at noon, our office. Ask for me directly. It was signed with the older man's full name. For a long time she just sat on the couch, staring at the letters as though they might rearrange themselves into something less surreal. When she showed it to Ben that evening, he whistled low. You're not really thinking about going, are you? This could be, I don't know, risky. Maya twisted the note in her hands. I don't think he's the type to play games. He looked serious when he said we'd talk again, and now here it is. Here it... Ben leaned back, crossing his arms. Or he's the type who can squash you without breaking a sweat. You ever think of that? She gave him a tired smile. Every day. But if I walk away now, I'll always wonder what this was supposed to mean. I can't carry that with me forever. The next morning, she ironed her one good blouse and borrowed a skirt from her neighbour. She stood in front of the mirror longer than she wanted to admit, trying to steady the shaking in her hands. By the time she reached the glass tower, her pulse was racing. The security guard at the desk glanced at the letter, then at her, and something in his posture changed. He picked up the phone, murmured a name, and within seconds a young assistant appeared to escort her upstairs. The elevator ride felt endless, her reflection staring back at her from mirrored walls. She thought about the dollar, about the insult, about the choice to send it back. She thought about how small that act had seemed, and how impossibly big it had become. When the doors opened, the older man was waiting just a few feet away. No suit jacket this time, just a pressed shirt and the weight of someone used to being listened to. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but softer than she remembered. "I'm glad you came." And suddenly, she realised this wasn't going to be about a single dollar anymore. Something deeper was unfolding, and she had just stepped into the middle of it. The office was quieter than she expected. No buzzing phones, no hurried assistants, just the soft hum of the city far below. The older man gestured toward a chair across from his desk, and Maya sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "That night at the restaurant, I behaved in a way that doesn't reflect who I want to be. And you didn't let it slide. You handed me back something I needed to see for myself." Maya felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected humility. She hadn't expected honesty either. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you," she said quietly. "I just couldn't keep it. It didn't feel right." He nodded slowly. "Exactly, and that's why I asked you here. I've spent years surrounded by people who only tell me what I want to hear. But you..." He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "You showed me something real. You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You just told the truth in the simplest way possible." Maya shifted in her chair, uneasy. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know what you think I can do for you." A faint smile crossed his face. "Maybe that's exactly why I wanted to meet again. Sometimes the people who see the world from the ground level, the people who aren't insulated by titles or money, they understand things the rest of us forget." For a moment, silence filled the room. She could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind him. "I don't know what all this means yet," Maya admitted, her voice low. "But I didn't come here looking for anything. I just wanted to be done with it." "That's what makes it different," he said. His tone carried the kind of weight that came from years of making decisions that changed lives. "You didn't come to ask. You came to close the loop. And now I'm the one asking." Maya looked at him carefully, trying to read between the lines. There was no arrogance in his voice now, no sharp edge of superiority. Just a man who seemed, for the first time, to be speaking without armour. And it struck her, this wasn't about a dollar anymore. This was about dignity. About the strange way small acts could ripple outward until they changed the very person who had caused the harm. The man leaned back in his chair, as if releasing something heavy he had been carrying for years. For a moment, the city outside seemed far away, muffled behind the glass. His gaze softened, no longer the sharp eyes of a powerful businessman, but the weary honesty of a man who had been reminded of his own humanity. "I can't undo what happened that night," he said, his voice steady but low. "But I can choose what I do from here on. And I don't want to forget the way you looked at me, like someone who saw more than money, more than status. You reminded me that respect isn't something you buy. It's something you earn, one choice at a time." Maya sat quietly, her fingers brushing the edge of her bag. She didn't know what to say to a man who seemed both humbled and uncertain. But she knew the weight of his words wasn't meant for show. It was personal, almost like a confession. "I didn't plan any of this," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "I just wanted to do what felt right in the moment." "And that," he replied, leaning forward again, "is exactly what people like me need to remember. That sometimes the smallest decisions, the ones nobody else notices, are the ones that keep us human." There was no contract on the table, no promise of wealth or opportunity, just two people sitting in a quiet office, acknowledging a truth that was bigger than both of them. a truth born from a single crumpled dollar bill and the courage not to accept what didn't feel right. When Maya finally stood to leave, the man didn't stop her with grand gestures. He only nodded, as if to say he understood, and as she walked back out into the noise of the city, she felt something shift. Not in her circumstances, but in her spirit. She hadn't gained money, she hadn't gained position, but she had kept her dignity intact, and in the process had reminded someone else of theirs. And sometimes, she thought as the afternoon sun warmed her face, that was worth more than anything written on a paycheck. Lesson: true worth is not measured by money or status, but by the dignity you keep and the respect you show. Even the smallest choices can reveal who you really are. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very last moment of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you again soon here on Rain Inside.